Hi, so now let's talk a little bit about observables, not JavaScript. So this is inspired on this notebook. I recommend you taking a look at it to see like a very good introduction about the differences between JavaScript and the thing that you find on Observable. The other thing that it's important for you to check is that if you actually go into the theme for the class, there is a notebook that we created called Learn.js Data. So actually this one, it's an adaptation of a book created by all of these great people, Jim Bajendigan and a lot of other folks that used to work at Bocoup. And then we adapted that for ES6 and the D3 version 6 version. Or D3 version 6. So I recommend you taking a look, especially all of the different steps. It contains also information that will be useful for you handling data with JavaScript. But let's get started. So let's say that I come in here and then I'm going to create into the Berkeley Biz theme. I'm going to create like an intro to JavaScript. So whenever you're working with Observable, like notice many things in here. First, like in Observable, everything it's created on cells. And these cells are not JavaScript. Like for instance, if I go and I create something like this on, I already closed that on like the browser, or even here, remember that if I go and put that in there, that doesn't work. So the only reason why it works is because Observable uses, how's that? Like a superset of JavaScript. It's an enhanced version of JavaScript. So for instance, you can create markdown literals, but everything is in that same language. So once you have done that, then you can create a new cell. The way of doing that is you can click on this button. I like using the shortcuts, the keyboard shortcuts. I recommend you learning them. If you go and just write, I think if you click everywhere and then hit shift question mark, then you can get like the help of all the different shortcuts that you can use. So for instance, for creating a new one on Mac, it's command, I think, enter, okay? And that gets you a new one. The other one that I want you to remember is shift enter. And basically what that does is that it reruns a cell. So basically, if I go and write a value, then if I want to see the value for that, I can either click on this, or I can go and create an element like this. So like that could be a cell. Then you also have this thing in here that is to pin and unpin a cell. So if you unclick that, then you don't see the code, but you can always just click here and then see, expand the code to actually see what's in there. This one is to keep the code exposed. So for instance, we don't want this one to be exposed, so I can keep it like that. But anytime you can go and write in there and write your favorite word. So just to keep it in there. By the way, you can write any markdown in there, but we're not going to do too deep into that. Now, the other thing that is very important is that, let's say that, for instance, I go and I create, remember the previous example, so I create an age. So for instance, something like this. And then on a different cell, then I say double age equals age times 2. Then, as you can see, this is giving us the expected value. This is the return value for this cell. And this is important because if I go and I change this, and the moment I execute this or I leave the cell, the other one will immediately execute. And the other thing that it's important is that I can run this in whatever order I want. So because cells are executed in, how they call that, is not in this, they're executed in topological order. And what that means is that they create a dependency graph of this chart that you can actually see a small version in here, what says double H depends on age. So every time you change age, double H is going to execute again. If that is too confusing, just think about Excel. So when you go into Excel and you create two cells, it doesn't matter in what position they are. If one cell is referencing the other and you change the other, then the first one is going to change. So keep that in mind. Once you learn that, it's going to be very useful. Okay. The other thing important to know in here, you can use all of the different values for variable types in JavaScript. You can use them in here too. Like for instance, if you want to create a name, this will be this. Then you can also create a list. So list and then you can say age time name. And you can also create functions if you want. So you can say name, and then actually do exactly the same thing. And this is important. I can go and create the same things that I had before in the previous example, and then name is, and then age, years old. So remember, like this thing, it's not going to really show it in there. So that's going to show up here in the console if I actually execute that function. So I am just defining the function in there. So if I want to call it, then I have to call it in a different cell. So if I just say name, this is not returning anything. And then this is the value in here. Okay. The other thing you cannot do is, like, for instance, you cannot say something like this. So you can only have one statement per cell, okay? If you want to have multiple things in your cell, then you just do it like this. And then it's kind of like saying this is a block. And by the way, I have prettier enabled. So that is the one that clean up all of my code. Basically what that's saying, that that's JavaScript code, and whatever you put inside, it can be any of the JavaScript that you can write, like I think most of it at least. So you can have these things. This is still not returning anything, so if you want to return something, like say for instance the name, you can get it in here. And now these things, this highlighting is actually telling me that it depends on that. You can double click to jump into that, holding option at least on Mac, and it's going to take you there. And always remember this visualization, which I love. It's quite useful for navigating and for actually having to jump into different cells. Cells can have a name. This is the name of the cell, or can be nameless. Like for instance, when you say, for instance, in here, let me create a new one, get rid of this. If you say 1, then that's a cell that is, or the one that we had before that was just calling the function. Now, the problem is if you want to create a person, like the way that you will do it on JavaScript will be something like this. Remember? So if I do that, then it's actually not returning and it's not giving me what I expected. So the reason for that is that since this is already for creating like blocks, then you need to put that into parentheses. And then just by doing that, then you get an object as you expected. Okay. What else? If you want to import things, like for instance, you want to create, start working with D3, then you just say, I want to import, and then you can pass any npm package or node package in here, and that is going to go and search that on npm, and then it's going to give you the function in here. And then after that, and usually what you're going to find is that people will do the imports at the end, and then you can start using D3 in there for doing whatever you want. Like for instance, I can do a D3 range from 0 to 20, and that gives me those numbers. Okay, so this required, then it's for npm packages. I recommend you sticking this to a specific version. We're going to be using D3 version 6 mostly. That was released like a week ago from the recording of this video. And then you do that like this, and that's good because later it won't change. What else you need to know here? Apart from this type of cells, you can also have HTML pages, like HTML cells, or there is actually just JavaScript. So basically in here, I can go and say, for instance, I want to create an input, and that's something I can write on, okay? You can also go and say, like, this is going to be my input. And then once you have done that, of course, no, it shouldn't be like main or whatever. So I can put it like this. And then if you want to see the value for this is going to be an HTML element. And having that is that, you can actually see the value for that. And then when I do this and I rerun this, I can actually get the value of John in there. Now, there is a nice useful thing called views that you can do by doing this. And then just by creating view of, not only you get this to be showing that, but then immediately, whenever you change the parameter in here, you're going to have reactively, if that is even a word, the values that someone writes in there. This is especially useful, for instance, for creating things like range sliders. Okay, so you can do something like this, and then you get this thing. And then you can do, remember that we have the D3 range. So now you can do this, and then all of a sudden you have something that generates this, and this is being reactive. So remember, these things are executed in topological order. I have to write that on my hand or something. So one of the problems of doing this is that you many times want to put a label in there, and that's possible. But then you have to create a lot of hacks. So actually there's a bunch of libraries. Oh, and before I go there, if you are importing any D3 module, or not D3 module, D3 it's okay, but any other NPM module and you're having issues, I recommend you searching for module import debug. I think module debugger, it was already there. So this one, module required debugger. So that one actually helps you. You just write in there the module you want to import, and then it's going to try multiple alternatives for loading that, and that kind of helps you fixing your problems. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to say is that apart from importing modules from NPM, that is the Node Package Manager, and there is a ton of packages that you can get from there, like for instance Moment, that it's a great package for parsing dates. So the way of parsing that in Observable will be just to say, and I wonder if it works, so you just say moment equals require moment, and then you can set it to a specific version, and that works like locally. So, and then you can use like all of the things that you have in there. Okay, so that is for NPM packages. But if you want to use a package from a different thing, let's say for instance one of my modules, so my favorite one is my Navio observable, so I can do that by using import. So when you use import, you say, excuse me, what part of the module you want to get, so in this case Navio, from, and then you say what is the notebook that you're importing from. So you can do and say something like this. So just by knowing that, that is going to give you a variable called Navio that comes from this one. If you actually click in here, it's going to take you to the other notebook, and that is a great way of forking and re-implementing and adapting things. Like for instance, say that I also want to get the data from here. So and as you can see, I have a bunch of cells. Here is the Navio cell. This is the one that you are using, this one. And then here is the data that we are loading. So if I want also to get the data, I can also do that here. And then I can go and create a Navio of the data in here and then just use it. Okay. So actually Navio returns a view. So I can do something like this. And then just by selecting, then I can actually go and see the data that is being selected. So once I finish selecting, then it actually returns the data. Final thing is that you can also use Observable in the same way that you use in GitHub, but I guess in a more relaxed way. So you can come in here and then you can fork this Observable and then fork it into your personal account and start creating changes of that. So once I publish this, so let's go and I say publish that, they're going to ask you if you are sure about that. And then you can see that here. And then it also has a URL. And then once you have that, you can send that link, or you can also do enable link sharing. Once you have published, you have a window of time for unpublishing it until someone uses it or shares it. Okay, so you can also enable link sharing, and it's still going to be private, but you can send a link to someone, like for instance your professor, and it's not going to show up in your list of notebooks. Let's say for instance that I want to open an incognito window, so this one is not logged into my account. And then when I go there, you can see this is not signed in, and then I'm looking at this as another person, and then I can go and start changing things. Like for instance, I think in Navio I can go and say that the height for this is going to be 500, and then as you can see, it changes that parameter. So, and then Once I have done that, I can go and create all of those things. If I don't save that, and actually you should go using so small. So if you don't save that, or if you don't fork it, then the next time you refresh, all of those changes are going to be gone. So remember that when looking at those things. If you make any changes, fork it and then save it into your own version. And once you fork it, then you can start making suggestions and take a look for the other introduction to Observable, so they can give you more information on how to use Observable.